My dad was an AM radio guy because I'm also think he was like afraid to like music. Anyway, point being.
Wait, what? What?
First I got your voicemail, then I got you. We can meet in person or maybe on Zoom. So tell me what's your genre, tell me what do you do? I'd like to know the things that specifically make you.
Hey, I'm Tim Barnes. You are the genre, and in each episode, I ask someone about the first genres that inspired them, the first crafts they pursued, and how they feel about those pursuits now. My guest this episode is podcast producer and podcast host Rob Schulte. He hosts the Vanderpump Robs podcast that's all about Hollywood and the Bravo series Vanderpump Rules. Remember my interview with Mike Sachs on the show? Well, Rob produces his Doing It with Mike Sachs podcast and has a wide-ranging resume of producing podcasts for the likes of Conan O'Brien's Team Coco Network, Maximum Fun, and Sonar. Podcast production also happens to be how Rob and I met. See, I too am a wizard of the pod arts, and there was once a time when we were two truly struggling people trying to make a name for ourselves in this rising new media medium. So, yeah, I was kind of proud of him when I saw that he reached the heights of Coco, in addition to all the other wonderful stuff that he's a part of. How did he get here? The only place to start is in the beginning. So please enjoy my interview with Rob Schulte. I'm only talking to people who I feel are specifically their own genre. And when I first moved to New York in 2016, you were the podcast guy, and you were like zeroed in on me, and you gave me so much hope. We were both struggling. We were meeting at getting dollar menu items at McDonald's and whatnot, trying to get this live It's All True podcast thing happening at Union Hall.
Yeah.
And we were both grinding.
Oh,
yeah.
Grind set, man. But it was like, I think at that time for me, it was like, I do this or I go back to Kansas and work a job I hate for the rest of my life. So like, I better pull out all the stops. Aspects of it were very selfish, right? Like, this person has a popular podcast, Tim Barnes, right? I liked Tim when I met him when he was doing stand-up, but like, maybe he's in a similar position like me. So worst case scenario, we just become friends, right?
Yeah.
Like, best case scenario, we help each other out, right?
Yeah.
So, but it is that like, I wanted to be the podcast guy, but not, those words like never came to my head, right? It was just like, this is a job I can do. I've never had something that paid my bills that I felt like was something I wanted to do. It was always, here, I'm going to, serve coffee or wash dishes. And then anytime I have off, I'm going to do what I want to do. And it never, ever got off the ground until I moved to New York.
Well, there's something about podcasting too, because it popped up in this wave of like being this defining element of new media, quote unquote, new media. And it's still kind of described as new media, even though it's been around for long enough for so many celebrities to have podcasts and anything. It's not an underground thing anymore. But even I caught on to that wave out of genuine interest of like, one of my goals when I moved to Chicago to pursue a life in comedy was also to this idea of like, I want to be a producer on This American Life. And I I love shows like Radio Lab, and I want to be a part of that specific thing because I love the editing of it. Like it felt totally in line with my interest in filmmaking and just creating stuff. And so that's why I'm
great, really.
And so, yeah, before we dive fully into the world of podcasting, let's focus on the start.
Okay.
We were both born in the time before pods or casts.
Yeah.
Linear television was the name of the game. Radio stations were how you got music and talk in your car. In the early part of your life, what was the first genre that called out to you?
Man, I've been thinking about this. You gave me some prep, and I was too much. Have I been thinking about this? Because we are both millennials. No one ever called us millennials until we were, in our 30s. But like, yeah, a lot of cartoons, right? A lot of video games, a lot of people around our age were into. But I think that the thing that like I latched onto, like if I'm going to find one thing that I was like, no one else I knew was into at all, but like it was compelling to me, was Alfred Hitchcock Presents. I loved Alfred Hitchcock Presents.
Wait, where were you? How were you watching Alfred Hitchcock Presents?
Nick at Night.
Oh,
Because
wow.
they would play I Love Lucy, and they would play,
I Dream of Jeannie. And
I Dream of Jeannie. I mean, when Brady Bunch came on Nick at Night, that was like a whole to do, but I was already like getting out of the Nick at Night phase by that time. When it got to a certain hour of the night, they showed Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and I loved it.
I had no idea they were doing that. You were really staying up late, Rob.
Yes, I was a late night kid, and it was 9:00. So but it was compelling to me, and I had never seen a Hitchcock movie. Like I had to ask who he was. I just thought he hosted this show for a long time, and you go back and watch it now, and they're still, to me, just as compelling as they were then. Except I actually know the complicities of or complexities, maybe both, of being an adult. So like these scenarios that were compelling to me as like a 9-year-old, maybe, like you realize like, oh, like this has real implications if this guy chops off the person's finger if the lighter doesn't light 10 times. It was, I loved it. That was like the one thing I come back to, that I was like, that is something that has stuck with me and was part of me for a very long time.
I'm assuming The Twilight Zone came out before Hitchcock Presents, or maybe Hitchcock Presents is a precursor. I'm not really certain.
I think Twilight Zone was before, but Hitchcock, I think, had a couple of different shows. Like he had like The Mystery Hour, and then he had Presents, and it's like Twilight Zone had like the consistency. Where Hitchcock, had a few seasons of both of those shows. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, it doesn't really matter. One of them was longer than the other. So
well, it's just interesting because Hitchcock Presents is very personality driven. Even though Rod Serling is the host of The Twilight Zone, The Twilight Zone, the vibe of that is the connecting tissue of all the stories. Whereas Hitchcock Presents, I guess in a way, that's sort of like Guillermo del Toro has his Cabinet of Curiosities show on Netflix. It's sort of like that. What was it specifically about Hitchcock? Was it the horror of it?
I think it was more of like the thrillery horror, like the complexity of like not everything is good. And I've never actually thought about it until now. I just liked it. But I grew up in Missouri, and my family was that like quasi-Catholic, right? Like we went to church for a few years, and then my parents got divorced. We stopped going to church, and I guess we were all kind of religious, but but I lived with my dad, and my dad was very much I think the easiest way to put it is do as I say, not as I do. Would like listen to Dr. Laura, was like morally superior type of guy, but was like not at all, but wanted to like put that out there.
Who's Dr. Laura?
Oh, Dr. Laura Schlesinger, very like conservative talk show, like morals, decaying the society, look her up. She's great.
Yeah.
No,
I was hearing some like focus on the family type stuff when I was a kid.
Yeah. And like she came on like back to back with like Rush,
Okay. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So this is like, my dad was an AM radio guy, because I'm also think he was like afraid to like music. Anyway, point being.
Wait, what? What? Afraid to like music?
Yes.
So you think he was listening to talk radio because he was... Wait, okay. What is afraid to like music? Like, do you think...
We'll get to Alfred in a second.
I'm just I'm just leaping to the conclusion.
Oh, trust me. I have worked out a lot of this, and I've like... I will never know the answers, but like my dad owned what he called a rhythm and blues bar in Westport in Missouri. But it was like a lot of just like 30-year-old white guys playing Mustang Sally. like every week. Like that's what it was. And so like I think he bought into that business because it was someone else's bar, and then he got hired as manager. Then he was asked, do you want to become part owner, that sort of thing. And so I think that was like, my job is making sure these bands are booked for this thing I bought into, right? So he has to focus on that type of who in his friend circles he can just make sure, because if we don't have live music, my bar doesn't work, right? And so I think that he would be too hyper focused on that side of work than to actually, like, if I venture out into other music, it's going to distract me from my job. And so he just turned on talk radio all the time.
Wow.
And so back to Alfred Hitchcock Presents, I think since he listened to a lot of conservative talk radio, I always got this view when I'd be picked up from school or whatever, that like, this is just the way people think, you got to be good and you do good things. And there's no, but it's like in this like seeping with like moral superiority and grossness to it. And when I would watch Alfred Hitchcock Presents, I saw almost like the other side, right? They're like, no, not everyone is good. And even though I know these people on this like conservative radio station, and I didn't know what conservative was at the time, right? Like, I think I would then see like, oh, this feels more like reality, like this morality tale that I'm hearing when I'm picked up from school is like people faking what they hope the world to be, but not taking in accountability of what humans are capable of, and like understanding that like not everyone is all good or everyone is all bad. And like you see that in Alfred Hitchcock Presents, like that episode I hinted at earlier where the guy bets that his lighter will light 10 times or he'll get his finger chopped off. Like, I believe that was written by or directed by Roald Dahl. Like, wow. James and the Giant Peach, right? Yeah. Like these books for children that I was also reading. So when I would see that, I'd be like, wow, there's a whole world out there. I don't even know.
What's fascinating to me about this Alfred Hitchcock obsession of yours as a kid, which first of all, that show, I want to lump it in with all the similarities it has to the Twilight Zone. But when you think about the intro music, it's so quirky. It's not ambient chaos. It's sort of like,
and Alfred like had like, for all of his faults, like he's got like these like weird quirky like puns and jokes when he's like playing it straight. And there's generally always something like he's handcuffed to a chair during the intro and he's like, oh, they're coming after me now. And then by the end of the show, when he's closing it out, he like just takes the handcuff off by standing up and like moving the chair. Yeah. And so like there's this big joke that's like, oh, well, I got out of it anyway. I wasn't ever in really. Like he just plays a joke on the audience and is quirky while we watch this like intense thriller about someone like playing a prank that results in someone getting thrown off a train or something.
I think that it's possible that Alfred Hitchcock to you was a sort of bizarro Rush Limbaugh.
Oh,
you have two heavyset white guys. Only one is angrily presenting a view of the world, and then you have Alfred Hitchcock strolling on camera saying hello and and giving you a more nuanced, skewed view of the world, and then you fall asleep after watching this horrifying scenario,
and never having like bad dreams or anything, and like always eager to watch another episode.
And it's because of this like dance it has with the horror of it all. Like the quirky music comes up again, and it's like,
wow, I'm thinking too much about this now. But you are absolutely right, Tim.
I guess like what are how do you feel by the end of a Alfred Hitchcock Presents episode?
Then or now?
I guess in general. I'm asking in general because I haven't seen them in a while, and I'm more familiar with the Twilight Zone, and I have the general sense of how you feel at the end of an episode of that show.
Yeah. Much like Twilight Zone, it varies slightly between the like, oh, wow, okay, that was the twist or something. And then there's the other one's like, oh, God, like that twist. Like, same episode I was talking about, the Roald Dahl episode, like, the wife comes in and like stops the dude who wants to chop off the finger. And she's like, "You're doing it again. You bet my Cadillac. This is the 6th Cadillac of mine. You've lost. We're not doing it." And she's like, "And I should know," or whatever, and pulls her hand out, and she's only got 2 fingers. Like she's been betting with him their entire life. Like hot damn.
Yeah.
Or it's her brother or something. Whatever. It's like it runs in the family.
I hope they're still playing it after the Friends reruns on Nick at Night now.
Oh, it would be great. What I will tell you is that specific episode I wanted to watch again because it is not on Peacock or whatever streaming service is hosting Alfred Hitchcock Presents now.
Why do you think that is? They still want to give Roald Dahl's estate the residuals.
It's got to be it. That has got to be it. With Wonka coming out, those residues skyrocket, I think.
So with that in mind, with this interesting base that Hitchcock Presents is the general vibe and genre that you were drawn to as a kid, and it doesn't have to necessarily be connected, but what was the first craft that you pursued?
I think it was like high school theater. It was like the first, like I actually like tried at something and I wanted to be a part of something, and it's something bigger, and like people have found success in acting and tech work and all of that sort of stuff. I don't know exactly what was like the genesis or clicking point, but I started in theater like freshman year of high school, like first semester, freshman year of high school. I had no interest in doing anything theatrical before high school. I was always kind of not always, actually, I was going to say I was always kind of like a showboat and an attention seeker, but I actually found some old like Christmas VHS tapes from when I was a little kid, and I was like very shy in a lot of them. And that was surprising because I've like concocted this memory based off what adults older than me have told me about myself. And they're just remembering pockets of things. But when I got to high school, I liked doing the monologues I was assigned in theater class, and I didn't realize that there was like auditions were like a contest. So if you got in, it's like, oh, I got something, right? And then you get that vibe. And then when you're on stage and someone says you do something good, it's like, oh, I like this too much. And I didn't even get a speaking role. I think I was an additional sailor in 12th Night.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And that was it. And then they made me the understudy for Sir Toby Belch, but I never memorized any of the lines. So thank God I didn't have to actually do anything. But from there, I always did tech or got some sort of role. My senior year, I was the wig maker in Rashomon.
Oh, wow.
Imagine a suburban Missouri school doing Rashomon.
Yeah. I'm imagining it.
I'm sure it was great. But that was a fun
Rashomon
one.
The musical, was it?
No, it wasn't Rashomon the musical, but but it was around the time when The Matrix came out in 99, right?
Yeah.
So we did this play in probably 2003. So we've had a couple Matrix, one other Matrix by that point. And there was one point in the final telling of the fight that we did a Matrix spoof, and everyone loved it. And I have to say, at the time, pretty funny. But also going back and saying, like, it just reminds you how, like, slow media traveled, right? You could still do, like, Matrix spoofs into 2003 or whatever it was.
I mean, arguably, you can still do Matrix spoofs now. They're really what's the closest cinema touchstone to that in recent memory? I can't really.
Probably something from SNL. They're just, it's got to be that. No, I don't know, man. I know that you can, but it's harder, I think, because like people are doing Matrix spoofs. People are doing Sixth Sense spoofs for like a decade.
But it's also because, this is great that you bring that up, because I feel like that's directly connected to Alfred Hitchcock. But The Sixth Sense is one of the last movies of that kind that could work because the internet was so young.
Yes.
Like, you just cannot do that anymore
No.
because it's going to get spoiled so quickly. But I remember I was just a kid, but like hearing the word of mouth about that movie is probably why I got so, like, a part of why I got so interested in movies. Like the fact that a movie could come out, some people go see it, and then you just hear whispers about it and people saying, you gotta see this movie.
Yeah.
You gotta wait till the end. I'm not gonna spoil it, man, but you gotta go see it.
That and the Blair Witch Project, I think, are two crucial movies from that era that really formed how I wanted to see movies. And that, it has to go back to Alfred as well. Like that was like, that lit the fuse. And then these other like spookier type things were really like, oh, but there's more. Like you gotta go in blind, or you have to like wait till the end, and it's so different than like a post-credit sequence on a Marvel movie, right? It is not the same. Like the stay to the end. No, that is not the same.
And yeah, just how subtle The Sixth Sense in particular, you're excited to look back.
Yeah.
A lot of twist movies don't leave you with the same kind of excitement to look back at all the clues that you missed. But yeah, that movie, I mean, I haven't seen it in years, but is a masterpiece.
I do have to say, though, that the theater teacher that directed Rashomon my senior year bragged in our class once that he figured out The Sixth Sense.
Oh, that's I really think that is a part of the trickiness with M. Night Shyamalan. I think 50% of people lie about the fact that they guessed the ending of even The Village.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the joy of, for some people, is just like ruining the conceit of those movies.
Oh, this teacher also brought us outside to show us his new car one day, Pontiac Sunfire, and then and also spent a whole class period once talking about how great My Big Fat Greek Wedding was. So
okay, didn't guess the ending of that one, I guess.
Yeah, didn't realize there was going to be 3 of them and a TV show.
I think there are some interesting points of connection with Alfred Hitchcock Presents and the first craft that you pursued, which sounds like you're saying acting on stage or just theater itself.
Yeah, I think acting on stage was more of it, but definitely learning like I never liked being a tech person, but understanding that like how serious the tech crew took doing theater tech. Like, oh, I'm not an actor. Like I do tech, and it's like, it is high school. And you you were drawing a line in the sand right now, but you had to do a certain amount too just to graduate. Like if these were your points were coming from, like if it wasn't sports and it was theater, like if you were taking points from theater, you had to like act, or you had to do like 6 techs, or you had to do these sorts of things. But being able to realize like I could be an actor, memorize my lines, get roses thrown at me at the end of the show, or I can learn how the inner workings work, and people were just as satisfied. I wasn't always, but like noticing that people were just as satisfied being able to make the thing work than being the star of the thing was eye-opening to me at the time.
I was in theater as well in high school, and I think that dividing line of being behind the scenes and on stage is very fun to explore for people of high school age. I was a tech, and I didn't really have any interest in being on stage, but of course, knowing that I ended up doing some stand-up in my life, there clearly was some tension there, but I didn't like the attention of like, or even want to attempt memorizing lines and being on stage for plays and stuff like that.
Can you imagine memorizing lines now? Like, I don't... How do they do it?
Yeah, I'm slowly getting better. I don't audition for things often, but I'm slowly getting better at memorizing lines. It's like one of those subtle things I'm proud of now.
It's a shame that you have to like actually sit down and focus on one thing.
Yeah. But Alfred Hitchcock, famous filmmaker, famous person behind the lens, but also is such a bombastic personality that he gets a show with his name on it and he introduces the show. I feel like there's some clear lines of connection between your eventual career in podcasting, being both behind the scenes and then hosting podcasts of your own, with Alfred Hitchcock, your theater career in high school, and everything.
Yeah.
So let's Let's explore that a bit. I mean, when I was in theater, I really enjoyed being behind the scenes. Before I wanted to do stand up or anything like that, I really wanted to just be a filmmaker. And I loved the idea of people like George Lucas, these mumbling, monotone people who, express their vision
Mm-hmm.
somehow.
Mm-hmm.
That dividing line is fascinating because like some of my closest friends were on the other side, acting and stuff. Where were you with that tension? You said you had a few small roles on stage, but
Yeah.
then you kind of ended up being a tech. Did you have some bitterness? Was that bitterness being expressed, Rob?
Well, no. Not and I mean yes and no, because I found a place to like fit in, right? And but I was always kind of like I think they called it a floater kid, right? Like I would float from group to group and I only had like a handful of like core friends in high school, but I could like get along with a lot of different people. Never really invited to parties per se, but I could get along with people at the lunch table, right?
Yeah.
But when it came to towards the end of the year, like my dad never went to college. He went to the Navy. I think he got like an associate's degree at one point. My mom went to college late in life, and it was interesting because you always heard, like you go to college, you'll get a job,
Yeah.
and then life's set, right? You've done all the things. It was like 3 months before high school graduation, and people started asking me like where I had applied
I
to
am
college.
exactly in that same boat with you, where
I,
college was never fully explained to me.
yeah.
Both my parents and I, don't say this with any negativity at all because I don't really understand how college works. They didn't go to college,
Yeah.
but then all of a sudden, this expectation of where did you
Yes.
apply and all this stuff. I don't understand. It was never laid out, and it baffles my mind that so much of adulthood isn't laid out for American children.
Terrifying because you also don't know, at least in my experience, what questions to ask. The first time someone even mentioned a FAFSA to me, I was like, I don't know what you're saying. Like, I have
Yeah.
no clue.
Yeah, I don't know what to say when I walk into a bank to this day.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Oh
don't know who
man,
to
they're having
talk
me
to
sit
or
in a
what.
seat. Am I in trouble? I I had no idea what to do. I loosely applied to a handful of schools that I did not make it to. My GPA wasn't very good. I mean, it was the middle of the ground, right? Like I was a theater kid. I was a strong C student and sometimes B's. And I just really wasn't very smart at all. And I didn't have and this could be a lot of people, I don't know, but in my experience, it took me a long time to develop like cognitive abilities outside of my own bubble around me. And I still remember someone in college telling me something that like really made it click. But it was that like he goes, "You know how like in your mind you're the main star of like the movie you're directing?" I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "Everyone thinks that, and only a few people recognize that everyone thinks that way."
Oh yeah,
And I
yeah,
was like, "Oh wow." He's like, "So if you were one of the people that realized like, oh, that person's thinking that they're the main character the same way you're thinking you're the main character, you understand where they're coming from more. Like if you get in an argument or if you don't understand why they made a decision, right?"
Mhm.
So it took me a long time to like get to that point. It was early 20s, but like at least I got there. Um but moving into like college, like I didn't know why people weren't telling me what to do, right? Like I'll do it, just tell, and I didn't even know how to express those sorts of things. So I ended up going to community college for 2 years and then transferring to the University of Kansas and just like, oh yeah, I have to choose a major. Like
yeah,
that
yeah,
also
yeah.
a thing I don't know about. So I just chose theater. Actually, I chose education because I took one class in community college and the person's like, "You would make a great teacher." And of course, me being like, someone's giving me a compliment, I will
Yeah,
take
yeah.
it. And then someone at KU was like, if you, a professor in the theater department, I was like, oh, I think I want to do both, but I haven't decided. She's like, if you want to be a teacher, you have to retake like everything you did at community college here. if you want to be a theater student, you don't. I said,
that's the thing about higher education is that it just ends up feeling like a Ponzi scheme. Like if you don't, I feel like it's something that you have to be indoctrinated in, much like a religion. Because if you don't grow up hearing the words bachelor or associates a certain number of times, I didn't hear that a certain number of times. So it just sounds like gibberish to me. It's like, okay, oh God, I don't have a BA. Oh my goodness. I don't
or a BGS.
Oh my God, how am I going to transfer this? And it is just like, what does it mean? It sounds like midi-chlorians.
Oh my God, death sticks, quite frankly. But and Tim, here is not the biggest thing, but another like layer of complication is that I wasn't like an email person until after college, really. Like we grew up on like MySpace and, Facebook came along like when I was in college. And then, so like these social media platforms were easy enough to use. And like I had an email, but no one was really emailing me. I had to get an email for college. So I would like go in and only check it when like, oh, your syllabus is given to you in the portal or whatever. But I never used anything like that at all, except for like word processing to type my papers. So by the end of my time at KU, like you had to like log into a portal I had never even heard of to like apply to graduate. It's like, I don't know what to do. Like I took all of the classes and like, and at that point I was a mess anyway, but there's that other layer of like technology moving with our age that like, if you didn't keep up, and being a theater student's like, I'm already like working in the past. Like I'm not making movies here. I'm standing on stage and using rain sticks for soundscapes, like what is going on?
Don't scroll away. You Are the Genre will be right back after the break. You Are the Genre is currently an independently produced podcast, and because of that, I typically use this space to promote stuff that I've been loving. For instance, did you know that there are actual shows on Apple TV Plus? One of my favorites there right now is a mystery thriller called Criminal Record. Peter Capaldi is so good at being someone that you just want to punch in the face whenever he pops up in this series. It's just hands down some of the best writing and acting I've seen all around. Oh, and here's something that I'm sure I would be loving if I were in LA to experience it. Rob Schulte has a live show coming up March 30th, 8 p.m. at the Pack Theater in Los Angeles. He'll be joined by a slew of special guests adding their unique insights. Whether you're a diehard fan of Vanderpump Rules or simply intrigued by the latest trends in pop culture, you'll love the hyper-fixation on these extreme special interests. So don't miss out on the excitement as his podcast collides with the Trend Lightly podcast in a live recording extravaganza March 30th, 8 p.m. at the Pack Theater in Los Angeles. By the way, did you know that this podcast has a newsletter? You can sign up for free or upgrade to paid to receive new episodes of You Are the Genre a week ahead of everyone else, plus other goodies. Get all of the information you need at youarethegenre.com. Now, back to the episode. Where were we? And speaking of technology moving with our age, I feel like this will connect to podcasting later, but like me with my interest in studying film and wanting to be a filmmaker, I realized really quickly when I got to City College, I only had a couple years of City College and I gave up on higher learning as a whole, but was like, oh my goodness, like this editing technology is readily available on our devices pretty much now. It wasn't to the extent that it is now, but it was like, oh yeah, like, iMovie's pretty good and like you can just get this stuff and you get to know people but you can just make stuff now. Yeah. Like it used to be like you had to go to school to learn this specific machine that is the only machine that people edit on.
Yep.
And this is the only type of camera that people shoot on and all this stuff. And all that stuff was simply starting to dissolve. And I'm curious, to know your path going from college eventually to podcasting, but it feels like podcasting emerged as this holy grail of like a new thing that you can master
and wasn't going to be taught in schools
until
like maybe last year. Yeah. So once I got out of college, it was like the 2008 recession time, 2009. Mm-hmm. And so I was still working at Einstein Brothers, you know.
What? Have we talked about this?
Yes. We both have worked at Einstein Brothers. Isn't this incredible?
That is incredible. Like, that's the last job I had before I got my first paid job in media was at an Einstein Brothers. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I went through a few more service industry jobs. I like managed a bar. I was a talent buyer for like an event space as well / bar. And then I worked at another bar, and then I was like, oh my God, I'm becoming my dad. You know? And so then I got a job managing a coffee shop. And it actually allowed me to now not work until 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. and like work early mornings and train staff. What it essentially did was give me free time. Like I actually had days off where I wasn't necessarily on call. And they rebuilt the library in the town I lived in. And in the basement area, they put in a state-of-the-art recording studio with like editing bays, high-powered microphones, like everything you needed. And the dude they hired to run the studio for like, he had a contract for like 2 years, was like the guy who engineered the most popular Get Up Kids album and a lot of like cool Midwestern indie emo bands at the time. And I was like, well, this guy is cool. I'm going to go. And I was talking to him and he was like, Rob, no one uses the library. Like it's been out of commission for 2 years as they're like building. It was in like an old Borders for like 2 years where they were building it. And he's like, half the town doesn't even know they put in a recording studio. He's like, it hasn't gotten out to the kids. He's like, you're technically supposed to sign up and like schedule time. He's like, but no one's doing it. So if you ever want to just show up and play with the stuff, you can. He's like, and I'll show you how it all works. And he did. This is around 2014 or so. And after I learned like how to actually plug in a microphone and then use some of the audio editing equipment and felt comfortable with it, I was like, well, I'm going to start testing out my own show. And that was not very good, but that taught me how to actually upload a podcast to Apple or whatever other hosting services. And then through a radio listserv, I was connected with Mike Sachs, our friend. And Mike's like, I'm looking for someone to help me make a podcast. It's not like there's no money in it, but like I will write you whatever letter of recommendation you'd ever want if you want to move to New York. And it really just helped me. Like now I had like accountability. Like this person wants to make a podcast and we'll have edits on that podcast. And it's not my idea. It's just their script, their interview, this is how I want it to go. And so that also forced me to learn how to I never thought about like putting a music bed in this. And I did it. I learned. It was slow and arduous process. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to start like applying to jobs in New York because that's where the podcast boom was happening. And Mike said, he's like, I think it's great. I think you're doing a good job. He's like, you're not going to get a job if you don't live in New York. He's like, he's like, watch what happens when you change your address on your resume. And I had a friend who was living in New York at the time, and they're like, put my address on your resume.
Oh, yeah.
And boom, I got an interview for Sampler at Gimlet. That month. Yeah. And I flew out to New York, stayed with my friend, interviewed for it, didn't get it, but it made me realize the moment my address is different there, because they're not like this startup isn't going to pay isn't going to pay for me to move to New York for like an entry level job.
Yeah. It's so weird. I try to think about why I fell so deeply into the audio world.
I know.
Do you have a theory on that?
Well, I know what my reasoning is.
Okay, yeah. What was yours?
I love being on stage. I love like cultivating a moment, right? Like having fun and doing stuff, but I'm very critical of my body. And so when I see myself on camera, I'm always like very like, I can't like focus on the thing I'm making because I like just, it's gross, right? I'm working on it, don't worry. But like, because I know you were worried, Tim. And, but when I was like, if I make something with audio, like that whole aspect of me criticizing myself is gone. and I can make the comedy thing I want to make. I can make the serious thing I want to make. And I'm not like, I can compartmentalize the other thing that I'm working on in another way. So that was my reasoning of why audio connected in like this. I was also kind of good at it, but like, I didn't have the money for video equipment, but like those two things going together made it a lot easier of a decision for me.
Yeah, and there's something intimate about audio, and I guess it's hard to think back at the time when there was only so many podcasts around.
Mm-hmm.
There are thousands, if not millions of them now, but there was a time where it was very few. So I learned a lot about the inner workings of the comedy world from Mark Maron, and then listening to stuff that were things that were podcasts, but were, originally intended for radio, for like This American Life is a show that I first heard on like a weird road trip in high school to go to some camp thing that I can't even really explain now, but but it was the best way to listen to that show, and it was this great sort of unifier of the group. And then it just stood in my mind as like this organized show hosted by one person, but then there is like these different stories that come in, and then something that couldn't exist, even though they've made visual versions of This American Life, it can only really exist in that one form.
Man, you remember that horse episode?
I think so.
I think it was like in Detroit, and these guys rode horses through the city. That was my entry point to This American Life. Anyway, sorry, Tim.
But then it was also sort of like baseball cards in a way, like when you would talk to other people who listened to it and who liked it. Yeah.
That is, have you heard the latest Heavyweight? No, but have you heard the newest Comedy Bang Bang?
Yeah.
Wild.
Yeah, maybe it's still like that for people now, but it felt like a specificity of the time before we really took the dive into that.
Well, and they totally there was the iRolly podcast era of like, two dudes in a basement, with a couple of mics, and then there was like this prestige element, but it like immediately jumped to, there was no like real grace period of like, this is cool. It was either like, it's stupid because anyone can do it, or it's stupid because there's too many of them. Yet people want to spend millions upon millions to make sure that like those who are never going to have trouble with money ever consistently have a job. And those of us, anyway, you get what I'm saying.
So we've jumped ahead to you being in New York, which leads to us starting to spend a lot of time together in the summer of 2016 when I moved out here. And you were, like I mentioned before, hustling. Like you were producing multiple podcasts. You were still producing Mike Sachs' podcast. There's one called Mr. Corpo and some other ones. And I was looking for work, and you brought me onto that radio listserv. And so I was doing like transcription work. And got into a few fiascos where I accidentally replied all.
Oh, we've all been there.
Stuff, and then we've all been. But you really brought me into this world, and then we kind of had this like process of like, my first job in New York was as a podcast producer at Vice. When I left, I got you the position there, or highly suggested that you get the position there, and we both had certain interesting struggles there,
to say the least. And least of all, the struggle was not getting off at a subway stop that was 2 miles from where the office was. That was the closest to the Vice office.
Yeah. This podcast that we're talking on right now is me coming home through this realization that even though I kind of used elements of podcasting as a stepping stone into writing for television and stuff, I still love the skills of podcasting. I still love editing. I still love hosting and stuff like that. And I'm just sort of embracing this concept of like, it's nothing is a step back. Nothing's necessarily a step forward. It's all, as long as I'm doing things that are true to myself and embracing the idea that whatever I do will have Tim Barnes energy, that's totally fun and fine. So I'm curious if you have similar things like that. Like, are you perfectly happy in the podcasting space, or are there other elements that you'd like to reach? Essentially asking, what have you learned in this journey leading up from theater to working at multiple bars, managing at coffee shops, finding that amazing basement library recording studio, moving to New York, getting to the point where recently you were a podcast producer for Conan O'Brien. Through all of that, there is an inner thespian within you. Yeah. Where do you stand?
If I act well enough, people will believe it. But there's only actually a grain of truth in that, because, you have to put on like job performance, like, interviewer hats and stuff. But to be like, I think the basic thing is like what television parents tell their kids, right? Like, if you apply yourself, you can do anything. But that's hard to do, especially when you're extremely poor, right? Or you don't have the time. It all buckles down to like not having the privileges, right, that like other people have been given in life. And so as many things I have stacked in my deck that helped me, there were a bunch of stuff that like I didn't know. And if I wanted to move into this category of like employment, I had to like press pause on my life, on the things that I liked, on the partying, on the whatever, and apply myself to that stuff. Like I remember when Apple just put the podcast app on the phone, and I would listen to Comedy Bang Bang, and I would be like, oh, like I can make something like this. I want to make comedy my own style of comedy, because I had done stand up here and there and I wasn't good at it, but I knew I was at least had like elements of being clever inside me. And maybe that comes back to what we're talking about with editing. It's like, if I can actually like know how to do something and then apply what I want on top of that, I can make it whatever I want it to be. And I don't have to like worry about doing it for a live audience or a live person standing in front of me. And just putting this all together of like what I've learned is that I've always like, and it's only been recently that I've started to like pull away from this. I always had this thought like, and it's a really like negative thought I shouldn't have, but I had like the like, well, if I can figure this out, anyone can figure this out. And that's just not true, right? Like it's because I had put in the hours and the time and wanted it, right? And so does it mean that podcasting is what my end goal was? At one point in time, yeah. And then I hit it and I was like, okay, well, I like doing this, but maybe if I apply that same sort of work ethic or just ethic to myself, what else can I do? Right? So, I would love to write a book, right? I would love to, and I don't want it to be like, don't get me wrong, Tim, we all love The Lord of the Rings, but that would not be the book that I write, right? I would probably write something that has to do with comedy and television, right? Like a satire or something like that, like a coffee table book about coffee. No, a coffee table book like that's fun, something that's like that. Like I could do that because in my mind, it's like, oh, I'll just take the elements of how I make a podcast and just change out the puzzle pieces to like writing a book, right? I'd love to write a television show. That has been a goal for a long time, but I'm not in those circles. I mean, I guess I am, but I'm not in it in a way that like, here's my spec script for a new Frasier reboot. We're going to put this other Frasier reboot aside, and here's a new one. But I love where I'm at. And I think I should also mention that, I was a producer at Team Coco. I had some fairly successful shows under my belt with that, before that. But I needed to separate. Like I love comedy and I wanted to work in comedy for so long. But when I became a producer for a comedy team, it's like the comedy left, right? It was like, now how do I do this? And I didn't want to become like the senior producer or the manager or whatever that was like, I'm also good at comedy. And that's why I work for Team Coco. And no shade at those who do. Like I get it. But my brand of humor, quote fingers going up, is different than someone else's, right? So something I thought was funny wouldn't maybe pass in a room. So I took a job at a place that's not focused on comedy. And now I can do the things that I want to do that I find entertaining or comedic or whatever in my own time. And then use all of the skills I built to be a pretty darn good worker at this other place in making their podcasts. And while I'm doing that, I'm developing a whole new skill set of like a world I never thought I would even be in. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I like podcasting. I'm glad I'm here. But if I want to write a book, I'll write a book. I'll write a GD book too.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about the times we're in right now is that the ladders that existed in our youth just are leading to nowhere or don't exist at all.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it is on us. Like the ladders are just impaling us, not to give you some Alfred Hitchcock images, but they all lead to us in the end. And so there's really nothing stopping anybody from writing a book or doing anything anymore.
Yeah.
And in fact, all of the other forms of media are just becoming the things that are readily accessible to us anyway. Like YouTube is not that different from Netflix, is not that different from HBO Max. Isn't the interface? I watch YouTube on my TV just like anything else.
Mm-hmm.
But you reminded me of like when I was at Vice, I really struggled with that duality of wanting to perform on stage, wanting to be recognized specifically as a comedian, at the same time that my bread and butter was behind the scenes work, producing shows. And sometimes it would be, Roy Wood Jr., who knows who I am as a comedian, is now booked on a show I'm producing about basketball. So now I'm going to see him in a room where I'm doing this other thing. And it was just really not a good feeling when someone that you want to see you in one specific way is seeing you in a different way.
I totally get it. Like I had a similar experience, and I don't know if it was at Vice or wherever, but like I know exactly what you mean. It was like a comedy mind that was huge, who I knew had read Mike Sachs's books and was like a fan of Mike's. And I wanted to be like, hey, yeah, Mike's my buddy too. We'll go out in Park Slope and hang out. And, I also help with the podcast. But it's just like, there's too many layers.
Yeah.
And I am in this like diminutive role here in this like booth, like everything like looks, it's like everyone's got a throne and I'm sitting in a folding chair, but really, no, I have a throne at home. Like I have one. It's so, God, and you got to get over that stuff. I mean, like we had to get over that stuff.
You have to get over it. And I think we've both gotten to the point where we see the other end of it.
Yes. And it makes me remember that when I meet people that recognize, I don't recognize, like see myself in them, but I remember like being at that level of like, of my genre.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. There's a documentary about Bill Withers that I love. He says this thing where he says it's like, it's fine to head out for wonderful, but before you get to wonderful, you're going to have to pass through all right. And when you get to all right, take a good look around because it might be as far as you get.
Yeah.
And I think about that all the time. And I think that is something that's really humbled me these past few years. Just like if you really get content with the all right, you find different ways to head out for wonderful, but all right really isn't so bad. It's
I got to tell you, at a certain point in my life, all right was like the max. Like what I consider all right now was like, you couldn't even fathom. Right. So, and I have to think back to that a lot of times. Like if I'm in a state and I'm like pissed off at one thing or another, I'm just like, dude, think about like 15 years ago. Right.
Yeah.
Like,
This
was not possible, like to be here. And you're thinking it's all right. You're thinking it's like, oh, this, it could be better. And it's like, no. There was a point where this was the top.
Well, I think we kind of covered the bases, but if we want to specifically talk about what your relationship is to that initial craft of acting, what would you say your relationship to that is?
I think the cynical side of me says that it's like, I want attention, right? And I could dive into that in some way, shape, or form. But what I really think it is that I like to make things, right? And I like it to be from my brain, and I like to just do what I think is fun or funny or entertaining.
Yeah.
And I've known from a young age as a high school actor, as a college actor, that a lot of times people do not click with what I find to be entertaining. But now I am in a very unique position where I can make what I think is entertaining, and the people who do also enjoy it will find it or not, but I get to do it, and it doesn't break the bank, and it's fun, and it gives me time to like explore that sort of craft.
Nice. Do you ever get the urge to just like put some of your podcasts on wax and just leave it in a record store hoping someone will find it one day?
I have actually that. Yes. Me and Mr. Corpo almost made those into vinyls. And then I was like, man, what if I did like a best of Vanderpump Robs and just like put those on? Like, how much couldn't possibly cost that much, right? But yes, it does.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I have to have you back on the podcast at some point to talk about Vanderpump as a genre.
Oh,
and
how did we not this whole time?
I know.
But I get it.
Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah.
Want more from Rob Schulte? Just type his name in the word podcast. He should pop up. Freddie Nunez created and sings the You Are the Genre theme song, and Adam Smith produced it. Also, Freddie Nunez is my guest in the next episode. And if you become a paid subscriber to my newsletter, you can listen to it a week ahead of the normies. This is Tim Barnes signing off with your weekly reminder that you are the genre.
First I got your voicemail, then I got you. We can meet in person or maybe on Zoom. So tell me what's your genre, tell me what do you do. I'd like to know the things that specifically